on YouTube in just a second here. Thank you so much for logging in. Welcome once again to Tuesday Talks. We're really excited to see you. And I'm very, very honored to have some really great guests who woke up really early to spend time with us today. So thank you so much for doing that. For everyone's benefit, if you're on Zoom, we're so glad that you're here. I see people still logging on. If you're on Zoom, feel free to use the Q&A box right from the get-go. If you have questions that you already know that you want to ask, go ahead and put them in there, because we like to be able to see them and kind of hopefully fold them into the presentation so that we can get to as many questions as we can. And for those of you who are on YouTube, you can use the chat to do that. And I'll be getting those questions as well. For anybody who needs Chinese support, 如果你需要中文的话, feel free to scan this QR code for 小儿通 if you can see it. I think you should have it in your email as well. And again, if you're on YouTube and you need Korean, that is where you go. So, but we'll be able to speak English here, but I have colleagues who can help with Chinese and Korean on those other platforms. And great. I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes as people are logging on, but we'll go ahead and get our PowerPoint up here. Just a reminder to everyone, we are going to play Mr. View, Spot Mr. View again this week. And so if you see a random person here or here, make sure you take a screenshot, and the first 3 people who email us will get a free t-shirt. And we just love playing this game because we like to see if you're watching. So and once again, we just want to thank all of the high schools who are supporting Tuesday Talks. We are very, very honored that you have decided to partner with us on this. And thank you for helping us get the word out to everybody. Students from these schools, we're so happy to see you. And please continue to tell your friends about Tuesday Talks, as they will be excited to hear all this great news as well. So I think without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce my guests. So today we have some admissions officers from Southern California, which I wish I was in Southern California right now. We're going to hear a little bit about how wonderful the weather is, I think. But we have Michelle from Occidental, and we have Alex from USC, and we have Lindsay from UC San Diego. Thanks so much for waking up early. We're excited to hear what you have to say to us today.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle. And like Gloria mentioned, I'm here joined with Alex and Lindsay, and the 3 of us are here representing Oxy at USC and UCSD. We know that this last year you've spent way too much time on screens as we've kind of navigated the pandemic together. And we're so grateful that you've decided to take this next hour to join us in conversation. This slide is designed to show the macro level of everything that we're going to be covering today. So the presentation is actually kind of split generally into 2 parts. The first part is kind of designed to introduce our schools very, very briefly, but to really focus on the benefits of going to school in Southern California, which is where all 3 of our schools are located. The second major role of this presentation is to help you kind of think about the questions that you're going to be asking admission officers as this year goes on. We'll be talking about how admission officers interpret your questions, so like what we're thinking about and what the kind of hidden questions that we think you're trying to ask. We'll tell you about how we kind of think about the question and include recommendations on how to improve those questions. We'll end the presentation with some action items, as well as plenty of time for Q&A. So certainly kind of a very full presentation, but plenty of time for Q&A. And we're really hoping that you submit questions, like Gloria mentioned, either in the Q&A format or somewhere else on other platforms so that we can go ahead and address them in our presentation. I know that we are having a little bit of technical issues, and so this, it looks like we're back. So if we were in person, I would kind of ask the audience for kind of to guess what these dots mean on this picture of this map of the US. And the answer is each dot actually represents a different college or university. And the difference between college and university basically means that a college is actually going to distribute bachelor's degrees. Universities give out master's degrees and higher kind of degrees. There are some exceptions to this rule, but you should know that you'll be admitted into a college at USC or UCSD for your undergraduate work. It's important to recognize kind of the entire ecosystem and complexity of kind of the education system, or kind of the range and complexity of the ecosystem of higher education in the US, but certainly you know that better than I do. As you can see from this map, there are thousands and thousands of different institutions in the US with many different missions and goals, but we want to focus on the very left of this map in California. And we think it's really easy to kind of first focus, kind of talking about California, but also talking about SoCal. And if we go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the history and vision that California has for our higher education system. California has over 230 regionally accredited colleges and universities across the state, from small schools through large institutions. And all three of our schools are included in those 230 institutions. This is probably going to be way too much for the vast majority, but hopefully it's going to be interesting for you. And there are generally four different types of schools in California for degree-seeking students. The first one is California Community Colleges. This offers instruction equivalent to the first 2 years of your undergraduate degree. It provides standard college coursework for transfer to institutions that award bachelor's degrees. So typically you're going to attend a community college before you then transfer to a different institution. Community colleges also offer access to all levels of preparation. For example, they offer English language acquisition courses, courses for adult students, all levels of all things. So certainly you're going to be set up very, very well to transfer to any of our three institutions. The second type of institution are California State Universities, of which there are about 23. They provide education for undergraduate and graduate level students through kind of master's degrees, and they're a state-funded public institution, which is why California State University is kind of included in the name. There's also University of California, and there's about 10 of those here. UCSD, University of California, San Diego, is your example here on this presentation. Again, this is a state-funded public institution with a special emphasis on research. And they provide education from your undergraduate degrees through doctoral degrees. There's also about a minimum of 85 private institutions in California, and Oxy and both University of Southern California are both private institutions. We are not principally funded by the state of California, and all of our schools can offer anything from bachelor's degrees through doctoral degrees. So with that, we're going to briefly introduce our three schools, and I'll go ahead and start with mine, Occidental. Oxy, we call it for short. So Oxy is about 2,000 students in total. I mentioned kind of that, I defined a college earlier on. And so that's kind of exactly what Oxy is. We focus exclusively on the undergraduate experience. We specialize in that experience. We're about 8 miles or 13 kilometers away from the CBD, the district downtown Los Angeles, but we are in a residential part of LA. As you can see here, our average class size is 19. 90% of our students never enter a class with more than 35 students, and 90% of our students are graduating with some type of internship experience. The most popular majors for international students are psychology, computer science, music, film, and diplomacy and world affairs, which is our take on international relations. But I'm going to go now and hand it over to Lindsay to introduce UCSD.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning. Good morning from San Diego. My name is Lindsay Fogelman-Tran, and I'm the Assistant Director of International Admissions at UC San Diego. And so UC San Diego, like Michelle mentioned, is part of the University of California system. We are the southernmost campus, so we are located about 30 minutes north of the Mexico border, and we are on the coast, so on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. So as you can see in the middle there, that's our Scripps Institute of Oceanography and our pier that sticks out into the water there. So it's an absolutely beautiful place to go to school. We are a large university, so we have over 30,000 undergraduate students, about 18,000 15% of that student population is international students that represent more than 90 different countries. We have about 140 majors for students to select from at the university. And I think, as Michelle mentioned as well, with the UCs, we're often known for our research. And at UC San Diego, we receive over 1.4 billion US dollars research funding a year, which puts us in the top 5 universities in the United States for research funding. So there's really a lot of opportunities for students to engage in undergraduate research, even starting in their first years. And we just have a lot to offer. So I'm happy to answer those additional questions if students have those at the end. And I will turn it over to Alex to talk about USC.
Excellent. Thank you, Lindsay. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Alex Salvandio-Winkers. I use pronouns he, him, his. It's wonderful to see everyone, albeit virtually, here today. I'm the Associate Director for International Recruitment for USC. So very quickly, USC at a glance. As Michelle mentioned, we are also a private research university. We are based in Los Angeles, California, very much in the heart of the city, just about 1.5 miles, 2 miles from downtown LA. The thing about LA is it's a very large, geographically speaking city. So you can be in LA and be in a lot of different places, geographically speaking. In terms of the size of the university, I do think that's always kind of important to think about, regardless if you're looking at private or looking at a public institution. We have a total enrollment at USC of just a little over 48,000 students. So that's both undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral students. Now, of that, 21,000, a little less than 21,000 are the undergraduate students. So we're definitely among the larger private institutions in the United States, definitely one of the largest in Southern California and California in general. One of the things that we like to talk about as a larger private research university is the fact that the actual classroom experience, the kind of the day-to-day campus experience is akin to a university much smaller. So while we do have a pretty large undergraduate campus experience, your actual day-to-day for our students tends to look quite a bit smaller. So you'll see here on the slide in the bottom right, the average student to faculty ratio is only about 8:1. The average class size is only about 26. So again, if you look and kind of just at other universities just in our size, in our kind of range, and also a little bit smaller, you'll find that these are actually quite good. They look a little bit more akin to a university that's maybe half of our size. And so a really important thing that we like to talk about is just really kind of the small environment. And I know this is kind of a well-worn used term in our industry and in our environment. But I think when we look at the data here, I think it really does kind of help us understand, really, I think the classroom experience for our students very much does mimic and mirror kind of that objective and that strategy for us to really kind of create important classroom experiences. Like Lindsay, we have a very broad offering of majors and university courses and studies, over 150 that students can pursue in their time at USC, with a few progressive degrees, and we do have master's and doctoral programs that students can continue into should they wish in their 4 years and beyond, obviously, for those advanced degrees. So I'm going to actually take us into the next section as well, which is just very broadly, I get one of the fun slides talking very broadly about Southern California. And one of the many benefits, I should say, of living in Southern California. I myself am a transplant to Los Angeles. I was born and raised in the Chicago suburbs. I did my undergraduate studies in the East Coast. So I feel like I have a good sense of kind of what Southern California has to offer compared to some of the other very well-known places in the United States, geographically speaking. Sunny, moderate year-round weather. When I left DC, it was in the middle of a snowstorm. I got here in the middle of February and I went for a run and I was like, this is amazing. I'm never leaving. And I haven't left in 8 years. I mean, of course, to traveling and to visit all of your schools, but certainly not to move. And so, you know, the weather very much reflects a very sunny, moderate temperature around, if you're Fahrenheit, around 80s, 27, 28 Celsius. We have very world famous beaches. I mean, some of the most famous beaches in the world are located along the Southern California coast. You know, kind of surfing culture very much kind of has root and residence in Southern California. We're a very large state as well, geographically speaking, and certainly for Southern California, you really have a wide range of geographic experiences and temporal experiences. This past week, I was on holiday and I was in the desert for 4 days, and then I was in the mountains for a few days, and that was literally all within a 2-hour drive. And so a really interesting kind of experience if you have students, if you yourself are a student, you know, thinking about studying in a place where there's a lot of scenic kind of beauty and nature. Even though we are a very populous state, it's such a large state that you're, even though we are a very populous state, better? Hopefully? Okay, good. Always a bit disconcerting when you hear yourself on loop. And then I
Always
think
a bit disconcerting when you hear
oh
yourself.
no, I'm looping again.
And then I think oh no, I'm looping again.
I'm gonna pause there, Gloria. Let me know when I'm good to go.
I'm gonna pause there, Gloria. Let me know when I'm good to go.
I'm not sure why it is looping.
I'm not sure why it is loop.
Oh, Gloria, now you're on loop.
Oh, Gloria, now you're on loop.
This is a new one. I've never had this happen like that frequently and long.
This is a new one. I've never had this happen like that frequently and long.
Yeah, I don't know either. That's
Yeah,
so
I don't
weird.
know either. That's so weird.
Oh, but you didn't loop there, Gloria. Did you?
I think we're good.
Okay, we're gonna continue.
Okay, yay. So exciting.
Yeah, right. The joys of doing this virtually. Thank you everyone for your patience. And then I think, beyond just the geographic and kind of physical space, I think the human kind of element, the human piece to all of this is that Southern California is a massive crossroads for culture. Obviously, we're located on the Pacific Rim, kind of bent towards, the Pacific region. So it is absolutely a culture and a kind of a crossroads of culture and language and food. In the state of California, there's 220 languages, different languages spoken. Just in LA County, there's 185. So again, when we think about the kind of the diversity of experiences, of people, of perspective that you get in living in a place like Southern California, I think it's a wonderful cross-section of the world that we find ourselves living in, especially in many of the major cities around the world, is a very kind of intersectional and cross-sectional blend of people. In terms of, again, a little bit more just about California, we're actually the largest economy in the United States. Again, each state is kind of its own little mini functioning government of sorts. And so if you were to actually look at California with respect to other sovereign nations, other global economies, we would actually have the 15th largest economy in the world. Now, this isn't specific to Southern California. We're actually just behind Germany and ahead of India. So if you can just wrap your mind around the fact that one state in the entire United States has more economic output than the vast majority of the world's countries, I think that'll give you a sense of kind of what the students are doing in a place like Southern California, where in Southern California, you'll see on the bottom of this slide, there is, oh, Gloria, yeah, if you don't mind going to the next slide, I'm not sure if that is a little time delayed on your end, but on the bottom there, yeah, perfect. You'll see here are some of the more famous, more well-known companies that have headquarters specifically in Southern California. If they're not headquartered in Southern California, there always are offices for some of the major companies. And so you'll find that, again, the opportunity for students to really kind of develop professionally beyond just, of course, the academic and scholarly research they're going to be doing on our campuses, but really kind of developing that and kind of transitioning that into professional studies and professional work is always a really great place and a really great opportunity to do so. So again, this was the fun part, albeit the little looping piece that we had there in the moment. But I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay, who's going to kind of talk to you about what we have in store beyond talking all the wonderful things about Southern California.
Thanks, Alex. All right, so if we move to the next slide, we understand that last week, those of you that participated in Tuesday Talks learned some tips on how to conduct a college search. So hopefully, you now have your preliminary college list ready, and we want to talk about what comes next. So on this next slide, we have a quick recap of some of last week's topics. So hopefully by now you've made a college list and you're using your college search techniques that were outlined last week, and you've signed up for mailing lists, right? So you've gone on to the different websites, you've signed up for your mailing lists, you're beginning to engage with the different universities and colleges through a variety of opportunities. So things like information sessions, virtual campus tours, and maybe now you scheduled your one-on-one appointment and you are virtually, getting ready to be virtually face-to-face with your admissions counselor or your regional rep. So we want to talk about how do you make the most of this time and what questions do you ask us? So that leads us to today's topic on the next slide. I'll turn it back over to Alex to take over.
All right. So one of the things that we wanted to spend our session today as we were brainstorming this is like, after the point of signing up for those things, like how do we make this the most productive use of not just our time as universities in terms of engaging with students, but also like for the students, how do we help you and of course counselors help counsel students to really make the most of, you know, the very limited time that our students have with us. And I say with us, meaning kind of just very broadly university representatives, perhaps not just me or Michelle or Lindsay, but maybe faculty members that they're going to speak with. Maybe they're speaking with an alumni in an interview. Maybe they're going to be speaking with a current student on a campus tour. And so, you know, I think the formative piece about all of this is really helping students in particular understand how to upgrade their questions. You know, we get a lot of very similar questions in all different ways over email, over, you know, WeChat, over, you know, in virtual sessions at college fairs. And, you know, how do we help you upgrade those questions to make the most use of that time? And so what we're going to do today is do a little bit of a case study in terms of looking at some, you know, we pick 3 kind of common questions that we get from students and parents and counselors, to be honest, that we think, you know, are helpful in terms of they're kind of from 3 different areas of like kind of realms of what universities think about and talk about. So one of the common questions we get is, do you offer major courses in biology? The second is, how do I apply for financial aid? And the third is, what clubs does your university offer? So again, not that these are bad questions, but they're very broad. And they don't really, I think, get to the meat for us as university representatives, to the meat of the question. So if we go to the next slide here, I want to kind of break down this first question, then I'm going to pass it to Michelle and to Lindsay to talk about the other 2 questions. So if the question for us is, do you offer major courses in biology? Oftentimes what I hear is, I don't know what to ask about biology, even though I know you offer it. I know isn't that much. I've looked through your course catalog and I've seen it. So I'm hoping you say something that I don't really know what to ask, but I hope that it resonates with me. And that's totally fine. You know, for some students are at the very beginning of their college search process, and that's the only question that they're really to wrap their mind around. And that's totally cool. But for us, when we really think about, okay, how do we make the most use of that time in the very limited time that you as a student or a counselor or as a parent or can have with a university representative, how do you make the most of that time? So what I think when I hear that is I'm like, well, have they done their research? Do they know what we offer? Do they know what our biology program consists of? Also, why are they asking the question? And what are they actually asking? Is there an underlying question that I'm trying to kind of pick out from that initial question? And those 2 things kind of really drive my answer usually is like, if I understand, I think the motivation or what they're trying to get at, instead of just sort of kind of spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, I really want to get to the heart of the question, the heart of what they're trying to ask. So if we go to the next slide, Gloria, you know, an upgraded question for me, you know, if I got this, I would have a much better sense just knowing what my program offerings look like at USC. You know, so if a student came to me and said, look, here's the context. I took IB/HL biology. I've really enjoyed the module on physiology. I see your biology program offers concentrations. Can you help me understand the concentrations between anatomy and physiology in your program? Right, so already out of the gate, I know the type of curriculum the student is taking. I know that they've done some research because they can identify some concentrations that our biology program has to offer. And what they're actually asking is that they're not quite sure how one concentration looks between another. And that, again, of course, is a deeper level of research that unless the student is taking a lot of time going through the program, you know, and really looking at the nitty-gritty of the majors, they're not going to know. And that's something perhaps that I would know and that I could give them guidance on and walk them through and give them a little bit more of a deeper understanding of kind of maybe the philosophy of our biology program as it relates to kind of creating these different concentrations or creating these different tracks. And so when I think about, again, you know, being on the road and talking to students, these types of questions that are a little bit more robust beyond simply, what's your biology program? Do you offer psychology? You know, tell me more about this. How highly ranked is your biology school? Like, those types of things don't really help me understand what you're trying to understand and what you're looking to study. And so having some context around these questions very much does help in our conversations with students. And again, I will, by extension, include parents and counselors in these questions as well. So I'll pass it off now to Michelle, who's going to talk about another common question, financial aid.
Definitely. We want to make sure that you are utilizing kind of the university representatives to our best ability. Our websites are really, really full. And so we want to be able to answer any questions that are kind of maybe not clarified on the website. So another question we get pretty often is, how do you apply for financial aid? And what we hear is, I can't or I don't want to pay the full cost of attendance. How do I kind of reduce that cost? As we're thinking through this, every school is going to approach this question differently because all of us have different resources to both need-based aid and merit aid for non-US citizens. And also that kind of ties into one of the other questions, that's who's even eligible. Maybe you're talking to an institution that only awards aid to US citizens. Maybe you're talking to an institution that only offers merit-based scholarship to non-US citizens. So there's a full range of schools. And so that's a really kind of tricky question. You've heard this so often throughout these presentations of it depends, and it absolutely depends of how a school is going to approach this question. And so your decision to apply for need-based aid might be a reason why your admission decision comes out a certain way. For many schools, particularly those that fully fund students that are applying for need-based aid, you're kind of set into a different pool, and it's often a more competitive pool because we'll be using institutional funding instead of federal funding to help fill those gaps for your financial aid package. Usually a desire to be considered for merit-based scholarship does not kind of influence at all your overall admission decision, but certainly something to check as you're going through this process. But kind of thinking about how to upgrade that question of this very broad question of how do I apply for financial aid? As you probably know, there are different forms that every school requires, depending on whether or not you're applying for financial aid. If you are applying for need-based aid, you might be required to submit certain forms. If you are applying for merit-based scholarship, you might also be considered to submit certain forms. So again, it depends. But this is kind of an upgraded question that we suggested. And this upgraded question is deliberately very, very broad. It's just kind of maybe a few suggested questions to allow you to drive the conversation in any direction that you actually want it to go in. So maybe it means you want to learn more about a certain scholarship opportunity, and whether or not there are any kind of attachments or stipulations that are there that are required for you to actually keep and renew that scholarship year by year. Maybe you need to and are interested in learning more about scholarships that you become eligible for after you become a student at that institution, either as a first year or as a returning student. So there's a lot of different ways that financial aid is kind of distributed to students. And so we'll want you to kind of narrow down where exactly are you hoping to see and what exactly type of need-based aid, merit aid, what type of scholarship you're hoping to receive to allow us to further answer those questions. Because when you say, how do I apply for financial aid? Of course, that's typically like a hour-long session on how to even do that. And so we really want to distill what you're interested in learning kind of down to a few sentences for you to learn about. So I'm actually going to turn this over to Lindsay to talk a little bit more about our third question as well.
All right, so our third question is another very common question. What clubs does your university offer? So, what we hear is kind of that you're looking for a group on campus, maybe a place where you have a sense of belonging. You're trying to kind of figure out how would you fit in at my university. And so my brain starts spinning because I really have more questions for you than I have answers. My university offers over 600 clubs and organizations. That's a lot. I can't start listing all 600 for you. So I need to know more about your interest. Do you want to be involved in an academic club or a pre-professional society? Are you looking more for a social club, a fraternity, a sorority? Do you want to engage in community service through a service-oriented organization or civic engagement? So, are you trying to continue in something you've been involved in high school? Maybe there's a club or organization you've been really involved in and you're wanting to do that, or you want to try out something completely new. You've heard about all these neat clubs and organizations at universities and you want to try that out. So when you provide me with more context, it really helps me answer the question in a way that helps you. And that's really how you get more out of your time with us. So on the next slide, we have our upgraded question here. So it's, I want to study economics, but I'm really interested in programming. And I just organized my first hackathon and it was so much fun. I saw that your university hosts one of the largest hackathons in California. So can I participate in that as an economics major? Are there any student organizations I can get involved in to assist with planning this or other similar events? So This question, it provides me a lot more context, right? It shows that you've already done some research on my university. I know that you have some basic information that I don't need to cover in my response as I respond to you. So, that time-saving aspect of it. It tells me about your academic major. So, what area you're interested in studying, but that you're really looking for this other opportunity outside of your regular academic area. And also I learned you have this interest in planning large events, planning a hackathon. So it really gives me a lot of information to go off of in responding to your question and really giving you an answer that would fulfill your needs as well. So it gives us both some direction and hopefully, you get a lot of information that you're really looking for. So hopefully, through these 3 questions that you've heard us talk about, you see the value in really adding context and adding some more information to help us help you. And so on this next slide, we have a few different examples of, some common upgradable questions. And so this is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are just some other categories that could benefit from upgrading your questions as well. Things that we very commonly get questions about, so deadlines, testing requirements, supplemental material submissions, information about filling out the actual application itself. So take advantages of these times that you're in front of us to ask these types of questions. What we really want you to do is we want you to go online, check out our websites, do your research, and then use the time with the admissions rep or alumni or current student, whoever you're meeting with, to fill those gaps. So you want to ask us those questions you couldn't find on the website. Maybe you're doing some research and you learned that a college that you're interested in is test optional, meaning that you could submit SAT or ACT scores, or maybe not. So take that time to talk to them about that process. When should you send scores versus when you should not? How does it impact your application? So there's a lot more value in asking those types of things and understanding how it will impact you as an applicant than just saying, are you test optional? The are you test optional is a yes, no answer, but do you want to know more about the university and how that admissions process works? You can really take that time to learn that when you're speaking with your admissions rep. So just some other examples of upgradable questions, that you can focus on, giving us more context and getting more information from us as you speak with us. So on this next slide, we have some homework for you. So our hope is, the next slide, let's see. Yeah, so hopefully you have your list of colleges ready, and we want you to think about 5 questions that you want to ask those colleges, and then how would you upgrade each question and tailor it to each of those schools. So let's say you just have five schools on your list right now. That will amount to 25 unique upgraded questions for you to have. So we want you to have those questions ready, and then it's time to set up those appointments and ask those questions of the different admissions reps that you have. And so on this next slide, we just have a summary of some different opportunities to engage with our universities and our colleges. So, we want you to get ready. We want you to set up these times, meet with us, talk with us in different venues. Encourage you to take a screenshot of this slide so you can reference it as you look at different ways to engage virtually if you want to come back and engage with us. And now I believe we're going to transition to the Q&A portion of our presentation. No pressure on the questions. You can ask whichever questions you have.
I was going to say, now people are like, I don't know how to ask the question.
Ask any question you have, upgraded or not. So we're happy to address those for you.
So I'm going to go back real quick to this virtual offerings page, just to give people a little bit of time, because I know that there are questions kind of about specific institutional things. We probably won't spend tons of time on those unless it's kind of relevant to all of you. But I do, every Tuesday talk, we talk about this. This is just we're starting the conversation with this talk, but we want you to continue these conversations. As you narrow down your list, as you get to know these schools, then you're going to be able to ask better questions. And I'm so glad that Michelle and Alex and Lindsay really touched on upgrading these questions, because you and I know, all of us that have been on Tuesday Talk, sometimes the same questions keep coming up, but they're not fulfilling. The answer is not fulfilling what you're craving for, because you didn't quite hone in on what you're actually asking. So hopefully you found this really educational, but I'm also going to put up contact information for your reference as well. But I'm gonna stop sharing this for a second so that we can all see each other and go through some of these questions. So, we are still kind of in a pandemic. And so obviously most Tuesday Talks, this question has come up. Given the pandemic, what changes have happened when it comes to selection? We talked, Lindsay mentioned test optional. We've talked about that a bit at Tuesday Talks. But I think people are kind of wanting to know a little bit more from your end, how maybe high schools are impacted, like your knowledge of high schools, and how you take that into consideration in your selection process. So I don't know if anybody has any color on that they are able to share.
I'll take a stab at this, and I'm sure this looks a little bit different, but I think the three of us the UC system kind of drove our decision here, but testing, like writ large, has been severely impacted. Some people are cheering, other people are not, depending on where you kind of fell in the realm of test taking. And when I mean test taking, I don't mean just SAT and ACT. I also mean IB, I also mean AP, I also mean A-levels, I mean English proficiency. There's a lot of downstream consequences to these examinations, particularly for like placement purposes for when students arrive on our campuses. So it's not simply point of entry that this testing was relevant. It was also the downstream placement pieces, especially for international students, that we're finding on our side as a university are making it a little bit more challenging to really place students in appropriate courses and making sure that those things made sense. And then of course, I think for you, students and counselors advising students about how to navigate those when the universities themselves aren't even quite solidified and how that testing is impacting, again, not just the admissions process, but the placement process, what to expect with credits come enrollment. So I think that's the thing that's really kind of shooken up the pandemic for me. When I just look kind of very plainly at what's happening, I think that's a major area in which we're not quite sure where things will settle if and when this does settle. So let's hope it settles soon. Not to curse or jinx anything.
For those counselors online, what would be helpful for counselors right now for you all to help you when you're making the selection process? Like, I think when we talk about upgraded questions, that is relevant to counselors as well. and what types of things can counselors ask that would be helpful to you, or provide to you that would be helpful to you, given that you're not getting the same materials that you were getting before?
For my process and the holistic admission process, when we review the school profile, particularly from counselors, that is an area that I think was really, really helpful. I had counselors tell us, okay, these were the tests that were impacted. These were the teachers that had to leave. So these are why the classes that weren't able to be offered this year. These were the extracurriculars that impacted the student, and maybe, why those extracurriculars weren't able to happen or were able to happen. All of that context is so, so helpful for us, because as we're parsing through thousands and thousands of applications, the student often doesn't recognize that their application might be impacted by COVID in a different way. So for us, the school profile was really, really helpful in being able to determine the types of opportunity that a student had access to.
Great, thank you. Lindsay, were you going to say something as well?
Well, I can add to it too, especially with the UC application. It's a little bit different since we're a fully self-reported application that students can apply. And so we always encourage, like, if counselors that are working with their students have the ability to write like a small comment that they can provide the students that they can copy and paste into the UC application, into the additional comment section, that can really help provide us context as well. At least if it ends up on some of the students' applications, we see it as we review applications from that school, and that can be really helpful. But even with a student who's applying being able to utilize those comment sections and provide us more context. I mean, we're coming back to this context thing again. The more information that you can provide us, it can be really helpful for us to understand, where you're at. But we do, we know that for students, that are IBDP year 2, like you've been virtual for most of your program and these things. And so there's a lot of information we know, but we encourage you still to provide what you can in the comment section so we can provide that in reviewing your application. We try to accommodate a lot of things like taking classes pass, no pass, rather than a letter or number grade or other things like that. And so, we already have a lot of information about those things out there, and we're willing to accept it, but it does help when you provide us some additional comments in those on the application as well.
For the there are a lot of students on this call that don't have a counselor. They don't, or they don't have a school-based counselor. And so if there's no school-based counselor, how can they give you the context? I mean, there are some high schools that may be new to sending people abroad, and there's some concern that you don't understand my high school and I'm not able to give you any more context because I don't have a counselor. So any advice for students like that?
I mean, I guess I would say like the student should be their best advocate for providing us the information. And so, if they don't have a school profile or something else that is able to be provided, what information can the student provide us about the curriculum that they're in to help us understand, do you not have honors courses available at your school? Does your school offer IB courses, certificate, but they don't offer a full diploma program? What type of information can you provide us to be your best advocate for yourself as you're applying? Because we do recognize some schools don't have, counselors available, or, here in California, counselors serve very large populations of students and aren't always able to assist them. So I would encourage that, but I don't know if anyone else has different advice.
Yeah, at InitialView, we were always like, be your best advocate. Advocate for yourself. Do the interview because that gives context. I mean, there's definitely ways that you can let schools know a little bit more about your whole background and experience. So, okay, so we have some questions related to majors, and I don't want to kind of go into too many specifics since a lot of students are here with different interests, but I want to kind of pivot the question to say, where is the, you had this question about biology as one of the examples. So can we talk a little bit about how to approach looking for major information? How does one find out more about majors? Where is there a specific place on your website that's good to go to, or is there a broader place where people can kind of understand majors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's always important to note before you even start thinking about majors is how does a university intake its students? Are you applying to a specific college and faculty and school within the larger university umbrella? Or are you applying to the university as a whole and then apply to a major later in the process? And every school approaches this perhaps a little bit different. So for instance, at USC, you apply both to the major and to the university at the same time. So there's a little bit of interplay that happens in terms of choosing your major and also being prepared for general university admission. So there's some differences, I think, in how different universities, American universities in particular, approach this, which again is very different than I think the European model, where like you apply to a faculty and that's it. You get into that faculty and it's nice and easy. It's clean. Well, easy and clean being subjective terms, but it's pretty straightforward. You apply to the one, you apply to the economics faculty, and you don't really have to think about the other faculties. But in the US, there's a little bit more to kind of keep in mind. Now, if you feel confident that you have a sense of kind of, are you applying to the school or am I applying to the faculty? The course catalogs, I think, are the Bible of sorts for all of our universities, but they're not really user-friendly. They typically are just like, here are the requirements and here are the courses you need to take to be part of that. And you have to do a little bit of cross-referencing. I would say always for us, at USC, and I imagine UCSD and Oxy are like this too, most of the major academic departments at our universities maintain their own department-specific websites with their courses, and not just the majors, but also like the requirements and the expectations for students in those programs that serve as an external resource, not only for prospective students, but actually for internal students as well, for students who may be considering transferring or moving between different programs. So you're getting the same information that a USC student is getting, or an Oxy student is getting, by utilizing those same resources. And that's kind of their purpose, is to kind of be this very front-facing resource, so that you don't have to dig through the course catalog and be like cross-reference what courses are what. You can just kind of very plainly like, okay, I need 24 units to complete this minor in our cinematic arts school, or complete this major, I need 48 units of this many courses. So it gives you kind of a very top-down view of the types of requirements, without having to like look course by course as to what's required to complete that major. Does that feel accurate, Lindsay? Michelle, yeah, feel free to jump in here.
Yeah, I think so. And I think too, when you visit department websites, it gives you information on things like research opportunities, internship opportunities. Maybe they have special study abroad programs that are specific to students in that department. And so you can read about a lot of those things when you visit department websites. They're so comprehensive. You can see examples of current projects that students are working on. Maybe there's YouTube videos, or you can read research abstracts of faculty of the department. There's so much good information on those websites. So those are a really great place to start, and just start poking around. Look at what they offer. Look at the graduate programs, like who could you have the opportunity to do research with in the faculty, or all of those types of things are on the department website. So I would echo that as well.
A follow-up to that, obviously, for the schools where you do apply to a major, people want to know, does it affect my admissions rate depending on the major that I choose? And yeah, so I guess start with that.
Well, at UC San Diego, we're a little bit different, I think, than some other institutions, selective schools, in that your major that you indicate on the application, if we're not able to offer you a spot in your first choice or your second choice that you offer, we'll also consider you for an undeclared major at UC San Diego. And so some universities offer that, and some don't allow you to come in as undeclared if you've applied as other majors. So we allow you a first choice, an alternate choice, and then we also will consider you for undeclared. But that's not even true for like my peer UC campuses. Some of them don't. And so it will vary campus by campus. So I think that's a really good question to ask individual universities. I don't know if everyone here wants to kind of address that.
Go ahead, Michelle. I saw you come up too.
At Oxy, every student comes into our school undeclared, and you apply, like Alex mentioned, to your major as late as the end of your second year on campus.
And we're actually very similar to UC San Diego, where we do a first choice, a second choice, and then if we want to admit the student, but not to the first or second choice, whether it's space constraints or academic preparation for those majors, but we really do like the student, we also will admit students undecided, undeclared. And I think to the follow-on question to that, I think, Lori, was, does it affect your chance of admission? For us at USC, I mean, the admission rate is already pretty selective and competitive. So you're kind of looking at an admission rate, that varies maybe by a percentage point or two, but in the broad scheme of like the thing, we don't really think it's statistically significant to say that it's different. Your admission rate, no matter what program you're applying for, is generally around a pretty selective rate in any given year. And I would say, just putting my counseling hat on, what I would say is like, look, if the school is a good fit for you, if the majors that you're applying for are a good fit, apply to those programs, right? Because the application, everything that comes beyond the actual selection process, the selection of the major itself, is probably going to mirror a better application. And I mean better in a lot of dimensions, but better in the sense that like it's genuine and authentic to what you want to study, and not about being strategic. Like, oh, I think this program is less selective than this program, so I'm going to apply to that and try and tailor my application. And then it looks like you're trying to like make it work when it doesn't really, and it doesn't usually come across as super strong. So just like generally try to avoid that.
That is great advice.
Yeah. To kind of pull on that thread a little bit as well. Some schools, it's really challenging to move between departments as well. And so you want, like Alex mentioned, you really want to kind of be forthright about where you want to be, because that's a good question to ask admission offices is, if I'm in one department, but I actually want to be in another, like, what does that process look like? Because that's going to vary institution by institution as well.
Thank you so much. That was really good advice. Authenticity is really important, and you ultimately want to be happy in college and not get somewhere and then not and be miserable. So great. So a couple questions about, just to clarify, people would like to know specifically about your 3 institutions about test optional policies. So, and if there are any changes to that. So if each of you can touch on that real quick.
I will go ahead and get us started. We are test optional for both the SAT and ACT for this upcoming year. We have restructured our admission process to kind of quantify different competencies that I think we were valuing in the earlier holistic admission process, but this time we're actually like literally putting numbers to certain things. And so that is the way in which our admission process has shifted and changed and adapted. So at Oxy, we value kind of diversity, we value equity, we value justice, and that's kind of in the core of our mission. And so our kind of application review now looks at like, how are you going to be as a roommate? Like, whether or not you're going to be interested in kind of learning from different people. What is, even if you don't have maybe a lot of experience in areas, do you have an interest in maybe learning more about these things? Those are the types of things that the ways that our admission process has changed to match not just our school identity, but the current times as well.
I can go next. And so we are test-free, test blind for fall 2022 applicants. And for the next few years, there's a decision underway from the University of California Regents on what the future of testing looks like for the UC application. But this last year, we were test-free, so we did not consider SATs or ACTs, even if a student submitted it as part of their application. It was not displayed for us, so we could not consider them in the consideration of their application. And that will be true for fall 22 applicants as well at UC San Diego. And so we do, and I think a lot of people are concerned, well, then what are you considering? Well, there's so many things to consider on the application. And UC is pretty transparent about what things we can consider versus what we cannot. And so if you look online at the University of California, we have 13 approved factors that have been approved by our faculty for consideration in the review of student applications. And so you can see a lot of that information there and understand what type of things we're looking for as we review your applications. But for the next couple of years, it's not going to be SAT or ACT scores. So for us, it's not even optional. So you don't need to sit for it at all because we're not going to take it into consideration. It can be used later for things like placement in a math course at the university or an English composition course, but you can use other things for that as well. And we have our own in-house exams for those. You do not have to take SAT or ACT.
USC is also going to be test optional for the next 2 admission cycles. So we did 1 year of test optional, which is the first time we've ever done that in response to the pandemic. And actually in response to the UC system choosing to be test blind, maybe not choosing, but being told to be test blind. We also are not test blind, but we are test optional. And I think, to kind of reference something that Michelle had talked about earlier in our presentation, just kind of about the California Master Plan for Higher Education. Michelle talked about kind of the 4 different types of kind of, areas of higher education in California. The UCs and the Cal States make up the bulk of those kind of 4-year institutions. And so a lot of what happens in the public side of higher education in the United States, a lot of the private universities oftentimes have to respond to that. Mm-hmm. So I think the test blind piece with the UC system really made us at USC be like, okay, are we out of step with what the rest of California looks like? And part of that is also because a lot of our students, not just first-year students, but transfer students come from California community colleges. So we have to be very mindful and cognizant and aware of how we sit compared to the other UC system, Cal State systems. And I imagine most other private colleges and universities, Michelle, you're nodding your head, have to be very responsive to kind of what's happening in the public space. Even though we are technically independent, we kind of look at cues in the overall landscape to get a sense of how we should as a university respond. Whether or not that's in our best interests, you know, at the end of the day, I think is something that's up for debate, and certainly part of the conversation, certainly on our end too.
Wonderful, thank you for that color. So given, you know, like Lindsay said, you know, people are like, well, then what are you looking at? There is a question as well, you know, and we've talked about holistic admissions before and context before, but this notion of reading by school, reading by region, you know, and that, does that impact then, you know, like basically our students, the literal question is, are Chinese students in mainland China and Chinese students in other places, you know, in the same kind of pool? Like, are you comparing them?
So I'll start with this, as I imagine our reading processes kind of manage the work a little differently. The short answer is no, we don't compare students based on foreign nationality or anything like that. We could if we wanted to at USC, since we're a private institution, but we don't. The most we probably delineate is just based on schools, right? We know that if you attend a national curriculum high school in China, you are likely of Chinese descent, and that's totally fine. We expect that, we know that. That's just part of our understanding when we're reviewing applications. But to then sit and compare you to a student who's at a boarding school in the United States, or is in a school in New Zealand, or is a third generation Austrian student of Chinese descent, like we don't really get into the weeds that much. We really just look at what are the curriculum offerings of your high school. How have you kind of taken advantage of those that show your preparation for our academic studies? That's I think from the USC lens. That's somewhat shared with Lindsay, Michelle, with your schools, or does it look a little bit different based on, Lindsay, does the UC system allow you to look at some of those demographic factors? I can't remember.
We are able to consider like the location of your secondary school and your residence. And so that is certainly something, I mean, I think I resonate a lot with what you said, and that we're really looking at context of your school. So it doesn't matter what your citizenship is, it's about where you're attending school, what curriculum does your school offer, have you taken advantage of the rigor offered within the curriculum of your school, or, you know, is it a standard curriculum that everybody follows? Those are the things we try to understand, and we compare you and think about you in that context. And we're not comparing you across a whole country or students applying from multiple different places. It's not like, you know, everybody in the international pool is considered all in one, you know, one context. It's so specific about where you go to school and what the offerings there are.
Absolutely. You've heard context so much in this presentation, and that's going to ring true here as well. I would also argue that the vast majority of schools don't have quotas that we have to fill. We don't have like a certain number of X student from this place so we don't, when we're evaluating students, we're not going through with that lens as well. So there are no maximum quotas that we're trying to hit or anything like that, depending on region or things like that.
Wonderful. Well, the hour goes by so quickly, and we're wrapping up here. And I know there were some questions that we didn't get to answer, but again, we actually want you to take that question that you asked, go home, sit down with it, and try to upgrade it specifically to the different institutions that you're looking at, because I think that will help a lot. Like, a lot of these questions are super general. And, you know, again, like part of the engagement and the dialogue is really kind of this mode of understanding. And if an admissions officer can kind of understand where you're coming from, they're going to be able to give you better information that you're going to be able to take and apply to your application process. So Lindsay, Michelle, Alex, thank you so much for time taken early in the morning with us. Is there anything else you guys want to kind of close with? Final words of encouragement to to our audience all over the world.
Thank you for having us. Stay safe, stay healthy. Hopefully we'll see some of you all on our campuses in the near future. Gloria, you're always welcome in Southern California.
Thanks. I'm excited. Wonderful. Well, I am, once again, the contact information is here. Somebody just asked for that. And keep in touch. Next week, we're going to have a great, next week we have a break from Tuesday Talks because I know that there are some holidays happening in parts of the world. And so the following week, we will have one about liberal arts. So for those of you interested in liberal arts, tune in then. In the meantime, have a wonderful week and good luck with all of this process. Take care. Bye.